You are now part of a social experiment.
See now where my limit is. Only got no.
Dr. Pilgrim, very committed to sociology as a collector of artifacts, Jim Crow related artifacts, Black history artifacts as well. I took his class, I think it was the fall of 1990. Went into his class, and every week in his class, he would bring in a different Jim Crow related artifact for us to have discussions about race in America. We will always start our class off with these different artifacts. So this one particular class, he brings in this, what they call a niggerhead bank. And it's a cast iron bank with these exaggerated features, big red lips.
Reminds me of Invisible Man.
Like that bank from Bamboozle, you know?
Yeah.
So, but, you know, and he just asked a simple question. And he asked us, what do you see? Perception is very interesting, man, because you got this bank and everybody in the class, this diverse class of people, see different things. You know, some people saw a black man, some people saw a monkey, some people saw a toy, some people saw, I don't think anybody saw a bank at first until he turned it around and said, no, this is a bank. But the power of an artifact to get people to talk about uncomfortable situations such as race in this particular case, and knowing the history that an object like this carries and the memories that it brings out for people who've experienced that, and some of those students who grew up in households where they saw those types of things. So it carries memory as well. So having those types of conversations were very, very powerful. And so for me, having that experience piqued something in me and made me want to go out and start collecting that type of material. So it was shortly after this class that I started going out and collecting that material.
And by going out and collecting the material, like, were you knocking on people's doors like, yo, you got any, like, what was your process like?
My process, and let me back up too and say this. I've always been a collector. I started off collecting comic books, baseball cards, football cards, basketball cards. And that's what me and my close friends on my block in Detroit used to do. That's how we passed time. That's how we engaged each other.
Right.
All right. Trading cards and comic books and that type of thing. Going to baseball games and football games, meeting athletes and getting them to sign material we had, that type of stuff. So I always had that type of orientation to collect those types of that type of material. So when it came to collecting Jim Crow, initially Jim Crow material, because of being in Dave Pilgrim's class, Dr. Pilgrim's class,
right?
I started going into antique shops, mainly up in where I was in the Big Rapids area. So going into antique shops, going into flea markets, going into some garage sales, and just digging through material, man, and finding old sheet music, finding some of those figurines, old newspapers and magazines and children's books as well. So that was my process starting off. Going.
How did you know, like, this is worthy of keeping versus this is like trash? This is old. Nobody wants this.
Anything that had stereotypical images that depicted us in a negative way, I was picking all that stuff up. And I really wanted the original material. So I kind of focused on that. But I mean, you go into places and you see salt and pepper shakers that were made, in the early 90s. So, and you realize that things are still being mass produced at that time. And, even today, the stuff is being mass produced. So I was picking up, just a little bit of everything. So anything that could help shed a light on the reality of the history of race in America and how Black image had been used in many different types of ways in the society to put forth an idea of us being inferior, of us being less than, of us being ugly, as a way to make white folks feel good about themselves, and a way to, make sure that we would never compete with them. Right.
Right.
For housing, for jobs, for education, for all those things that help people be mobile in the society, socially and politically and economically mobile in the society. So, but all these artifacts did that, and I was amazed all the different ways our image was used to promote these ideas.
Yeah. Now, in the beginning, I know like over time, you kind of like grow numb to, collecting some of these things. In the beginning, did you have any experiences that you were like, why would anybody collect this, or that would anger you?
Well, I mean, it still angers me, but I think the anger is more focused now. But I remember going down to Daytona Beach. This is just a couple months after taking David Pilgrim's class. And I respect my brother, Dr. Pilgrim. And we were walking along the beach in Daytona, and we stopped into a gift shop. And so, I'm expecting in the gift shop to see, postcards and, things about Florida, right? But there's a T-shirt on display in this antique, or it's not an antique shop, it's a gift shop, souvenir shop. This T-shirt has an image of Dr. King with a target over his head and the words that read, "Our dream came true." This is 1991. And so I don't think I've ever been as angry as I was seeing that, and disgusted. You know what I'm saying? So as a 20-year-old, like, how do you deal with that? I mean, for me, I want to go and tear stuff up, right? You realize, if you do that, there's consequences to that as well, right? So, but I found a copy of the T-shirt online a few years ago by using it in my presentation. But it's a teachable moment as well, because you look at 1991 and see what was going on. You had the Rodney King situation happening. So this T-shirt is the backlash to Rodney King, right? But it's also that target being over his head as well. It's also backlash to Public Enemy. All right, so they took Public Enemy's logo, put it on King's head, because if you remember, 1991 was also, when looking at the Martin Luther King Day holiday, a lot of people grew up, and this holiday has always been a part of their lived experience. So people don't know that there was a process for the King holiday to become a holiday. And it dates all the way back to 1968 when he was assassinated, right? It was because it was Congressman John Conyers who wrote the initial bill, I think 3 or 4 days after he was assassinated, for the King holiday. And it took from 1968 all the way up into 1983 for the public to even be oriented or taught the value of even having someone like Dr. King be celebrated and having his own holiday. And so it was people like Coretta Scott King and Harry Belafonte and Gil Scott Heron and Stevie Wonder and Dick Gregory and many, many other people who had to teach the society and get the society ready to honor King in such a way. But of course, when it became a federal holiday, not every state in America accepted the holiday, right?
Right.
So fast forward to 1991, Arizona being one of the last states in America to celebrate the King holiday, it came at a price for them, all right? And because of hip-hop groups like Public Enemy, and Public Enemy's response and the threat of a boycott of the state of Arizona, and they wrote the song and put the song out By the Time I Get to Arizona, and they called for a boycott of the state. So no conferences, no vacations, no X, Y, and Z. And at this time, Public Enemy had an international fan base. All right. So he put enough pressure on the state of Arizona for them to finally celebrate and honor the Dr. King holiday. So that one T-shirt has all these messages going along with it, on top of just for people walking in and seeing it, just the traumatic experience of just having to deal with that. But again, the power of one object to tell a story is phenomenal. And to answer one of your questions, I learned the power of an artifact to tell a story via Dr. Pilgrim's class.
So every day I'm going hard. I'm talking business, bank accounts, and credit cards. And somehow we defeat the odds and making sure that no one starves illegal or you had a